With Camilla, Nige, and a revolving bunch of deadbeats and hangabouts. Brought to you by Thompson Whiskey New Zealand, the premium stuff.
Oh, here he comes! Hey. Minister! How are you? Minister! Answer! Well, how's your wife?
Answer the question, Minister!
Counter-Clockwise with Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz.
Right, on the line with me now I have Selwyn Manning, of course. Let's just let this bloody sting finish. Selwyn, of course, this week, Paula Bennett has put out a few pronouncements about what she wants parents to do with their kids. She wants 3-year-olds in early childcare, I should say. This brings up a slew of issues.
Paula Bennett, she announced these social obligations by way of a press statement back on Tuesday. Ironically, the headline is social obligations mean better outcomes for children. So I thought this week would be a good idea to test whether or not there would be better outcomes for children. Now, firstly, Paula Bennett says that there are around 125,000 beneficiary parents who support 220,000 children. So we're talking about a significant amount of people that are going to be affected potentially by what she announced. And what she announced there was, like you alluded to in your intro, social obligations will require all beneficiary parents to ensure their children attend 15 hours a week of early childhood education from the age of 3, attend school from the age of 5 or 6. So you can see for that 2 or 3 year band, the government is saying you must have your child in early childhood education if you are a beneficiary. Otherwise, you will get 3 warnings, and on the 3rd strike, you'll be out. Your benefit will be cut by 50% or in half. Now, suppose, in many kind of areas, people will say, oh, well, everybody should, have their child in early childhood education, etc., etc. There are a few strains on that, of course. The cost of early childhood education is high in New Zealand. If you're a beneficiary out of work, whether or not it's temporarily or whether or not it's on a semi-permanent basis, it's still a very costly thing for parents to obviously get their kids into early childhood centre. That's one thing. Paula Bennett says the government can look at assistance if that's required. But what I'm going on here, Simon, is let's test it from the point of view that access to assistance in New Zealand has traditionally always been a series of criteria where an individual or a parent meets that criteria, then they have the right to that assistance. Now, what's happening here, quite simply, is there is, however, with this minister and this government, they've initiated exclusion criteria. And what I mean by that is the minister is saying that unless these people who have a legitimate right to assistance do this or do that, then they will be excluded from their entitlement. Now, that's quite a turnaround here. It's
incredibly coercive as well. As you mentioned just before, it sort of makes some sort of perfect sense to, if people are receiving money from the government, they're obligated to do things the government wants them to do.
Yes.
But you can take that too far. And it seems that there have been a number of announcements lately, and of course, going back a little bit, there was the one about beneficiaries will be drug tested.
Yes.
But let's have a look at that. Okay, I'm sure there are some slacker beneficiaries out there, but there are many genuine job seekers. Now, for instance, if I enjoy a puff of weed on the weekend, but during the week I'm hard looking for a job, why shouldn't I? Why should the government barge their way into my life like that?
Well, this is the whole thing. I think the government is showing an intent to kind of segregate a group or demarcate a ring around a particular group that it calls beneficiaries.
But they're always the untouchables, aren't they?
Well, they are in a way, and they're easy to whack around. They're an easy scapegoat group. Now, all of us kind of want to see, I think every reasonably minded person wants to see just about, the ideal will be everybody contributing to a prosperous nation and the economy, etc., etc., and getting to stimulated life through interaction and engagement within the working capacity. But I suppose, you could see that like talkback radio and the RedNet response was very simplistic in a sense, like when the drug test beneficiaries, a lot of people say, yeah, good on them, that's what the government should do, and you see the polls actually responding favourably for the government in that respect. But I think what it did was it encouraged people like Paula Bennett and the National-led government ministers to actually look at, well, how far can we go here? Many supported, I suppose, and to put it in simple terms, that rise of exclusion criteria from the basis of fairness, i.e., the beneficiaries should not be able to take taxpayers for a ride type of idea, and that's what Bennett's kind of been milking. But the problem is, many of the beneficiaries, they were in employment, for example, until recently, or have been entitled to draw down on assistance from the taxpayers' coffers in which they have contributed to individually for years in many cases. So, the whole premise kind of starts to think. Now, before we kind of look into the detail of the consequences of what Bennett is doing relating to early childhood education and whacking the parents of those who do not put their kids in, I'm kind of reminded here of the 1990s, Simon, when, the National Party was last in power. Now, at that time, Health Minister Jenny Shipley, in the mid-90s, she had attempted to put in exclusion criteria in the health area. Basically, what it was, and I'll just read a very quick list, it excluded people from accessing life-saving but costly treatments, kind of like dialysis treatment, should they have had a history of blindness, mental illness, intellectual disability, antisocial behaviour, or criminal convictions, and the list went on. Now, I know this because I broke the story, and it ended up being debated in Parliament on the grounds of morality. The exclusion criteria was found at that time to be contrary to our New Zealand Human Rights Act. Shipley, in the end, backed down. The Courthouse Services Committee was disbanded. That was charged to actually institute that exclusion criteria, and people were again considered for treatment on clinical grounds rather than on what politicians and how politicians valued their standing in society. So that exclusion criteria, National backed away from it in the 1990s. It seems to me by degrees it's creeping back in. And this is where, the concerns are. And I wonder whether or not Bennett's latest assault on the parents of children who are drawing down on their entitlement actually does in some way breach our Human Rights Act, or indeed our commitment to the conventions of the UN. I guess, the listeners, Simon, they'll have a view on this, and man, it'll be good to hear people kind of interact on this. But I feel personally, in watching this type of thing, a sense of caution about it. And I think she's gone too far here, the minister. For example, where unless the parents of these children, unless they put the children into early childhood education for 15 hours, unless they are kind of paying for that, unless they are meeting the government's criteria, they're going to be excluded from getting their benefit, or in the sense of cutting it by half. And that's where we look at, I think, at that point, okay, that's the government's decision. Cabinet has passed this. The minister is rolling it out and instructed WINS to actually do this. What is the consequence of that?
Yeah, so look, if we look at that, like thousands... Yep. The thing that sort of strikes me straight away is if you have compelled thousands of parents to put their thousands of children into early childhood care, can our system actually cope with this?
Well, that's one question. They have not put out the facts and figures relating to whether or not the country can absorb the numbers of children they're talking about here. They're talking 220,000 children that are the children of parents who are beneficiaries here. So that's a huge amount. One would imagine that only the ministry and its policy wonks would be able to kind of address. Haven't seen the figures come out. The other thing is, I think clearly the government is trying by way of a stick to whack people back into work. But I do not see in the provinces or in the regions or even in the urban areas like in Auckland any employment development policies that are coming on stream to actually get people into work. Even in Christchurch, Christchurch, all the talk about the opportunities coming from, tragedies down there in Christchurch with the earthquake, we have seen squat all up here in the northern area where the big populations are about, getting people down there to start with the rebuild. So I kind of think it falls down there. And the consequences, I suppose, sorry about the ramble, but the consequences that concern me is where there is no work, parents forced into a situation where they're having to pay and put their kids into childcare and can't afford it. It drives into overcrowded housing, parents forced into acquiring poor quality food, parents unable to afford healthcare, clothes, food, shelter, footwear, etc. And all this impacts at the end of the day on the kids. And their country, our country, currently has over 22% of our children living in poverty already. And all this does, despite the minister's headline, seems to me to draw our kids into a situation of entrenched and deeper poverty. And what we saw in the 90s is that kind of thing causing fiscal blowouts in the social portfolio areas like in health, huge costs by billions of dollars, and law and order problems and social decay in the urban and extreme rural environments. It's just unthought through policy, in my view.
Yeah, my prediction here, of course, is the bill will go up from the unintended consequences of this. And in fact, what's going to happen is, you will get parents unable to pay for childcare, and they'll have to go back to the government to, meet the government's own conditions. And
then the demand goes up. So the equations of supply and demand. If the country is not ready to actually meet that demand, the costs actually go up. It's just a factor of the system we live in. There are many other aspects to this that haven't been, in my view, I don't see any evidence that the government has actually costed those things through. Simon, you're on radio and I'm just a political kind of commentator, reporter, and we're coming up with questions that are not being answered here about what's the fiscal consequences, etc., etc. There are many other things, like even, Paula Bennett, she's kind of saying that they're looking at a total relook at welfare, that so much money from the welfare purse goes toward trying to get unemployment beneficiaries back into the workforce, and rightfully so. But she's saying that they're going to actually transfer a lot of that money into trying to get people who are sole parents, which apparently is 22% of the total welfare benefit, those on sickness benefit, which is 9%, and invalids benefits, 24%, back into work. Now, you kind of scratch your head there, and you kind of think, well, sickness benefits, they're generally temporary in nature anyway. Sickness benefit is something that is there for people to draw down on when they're out of work due to sickness or etc. Invalids benefit, 24%. Well, invalids benefit, generally people get that when they just cannot get into work because of their, chronic illness or disability. And I'm kind of wondering whether or not it's been costed from a fiscal point of view on these grounds. Are they going to get results in those areas? Meaningful results.
It begs
questions out there.
Like you're saying, has the government really thought this out? It begs the question, I should say, is this just a distraction? Are they throwing some red meat out? Is there something going on at the moment that the media really should be talking about that we're not?
I think the government is feeling bruised over the opposition parties realising that poverty, particularly how it impacts on children, is gaining awareness in the country. And I think the government realises that its current policies are not able or structured to actually deliver satisfactory outcomes back to all of New Zealand on these points. And I think this kind of thing is pandering to that redneck talkback radio type of constituency. But if that's where the national-led government is going and testing its ideas on the response of those types of groups of people, then I think it's on a hiding to nowhere. It's, at the end of the day, is it going to win the 2014 election? That's what they're trying to do. It may or it may not, but boy, you know, the impact on our communities is going to be severe while it pursues these types of policies for sure. We saw it in the 90s. We saw what it did then. It took ages to actually get a turnaround of areas in areas that were being affected. This is going to. It seems like deja vu to me.
Yeah, well, let's just hope the train wreck isn't that large. So, it's been good talking to you, and we'll talk to you next week.
Okay, mate. You take care.
You're welcome. Bye.